Thanks for being with us once again for our live stream today. What are we going to talk about? Guarding your heart. So there's going to be Roman numeral 1, guarding your heart. We're going to talk about your inner man, the seat of your emotions, the seat of your being, where you make decisions, the root of, let's say, who you are. The core of who you are, guarding your heart. Why? What's the Bible have to say about that? So now you could be a believer, an unbeliever, you could be a Christian, you could not be a Christian, you could be whatever. I think you still need to listen to this. Maybe I shouldn't say you need to. I would hope you'd want to listen to this. I sure would hope so. Secondarily, I won't say the bigger part. That's really the more important part. But the second part of that, Roman numeral 2, we're going to teach you today about how to guard your physical heart. So we've got a spiritual seat of our beings, our heart, where the Bible says everything emanates from. And then, frankly, unfortunately, the physical heart, where everything flows through, you pump out blood through your heart. It helps to keep your body vibrant, alive, oxygenated, carries nutrients. See, without our heart functioning, the physical heart, we are certainly in a mess. So, let me just read to you out of Proverbs. Let's start there. Proverbs 4:20. My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Now, obviously, these first couple chapters are really geared more to youth, young people, but it's applicable to me at 58 and hopefully for you as well. My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Look at the attention. Look at the drive, the focus about attaining and acquiring, holding on to these words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart. Now, how do we do that? The Bible says that we're to hide the Word of God in our heart. Keep this Word within our heart. Why? For they are life to those who find them and health to one's body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. For they are life to those who find them, they are health to your body, and above all else, guard your heart, for everything that you do flows from this. So what I believe, what's the implication? What are the Proverbs teaching us here? Number one, that if we're holding things that are not of God, spitefulness, envy, jealousy, malice, unforgiveness, unrepentantness, a hard heart towards the things of God or a sensitivity to the things of God, envy. See, all of these things will harden us. They'll turn us away from the things of God. And out of it, then the Bible says that the issues of life, who you really are, who you will become rather, by holding on to those things and not hiding and keeping the Word of God in your heart, out of it says the issues of life, everything. Let me read that to you again. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So if I could encourage you today, guard your heart, the seat of your being, the core of your being, not just your mind, but where you not only just make rational thought and so on, but your inner man, your soulish realm. Guard your heart. Be careful of what you put into it. Be careful of what you hold on to, because out of it, says the Proverbs, flow the issues of life. Let's roll over to guarding and protecting your physical heart. We have a lot to talk about and cover today. As I'm going to try to lay out for you again, we're going to talk about some triggers. What are the triggers for cardiovascular disease, heart disease, the process of atherosclerosis, what happens, what are the triggers and the implications. So you could be looking at this and saying, well, I don't know that I want to watch this today. I'm 33, that's no biggie. That's where it starts. I mentioned on the air earlier that as young as 14 and 15 years of age, folks that are insulin resistant, that have a poor diet, you begin to see atherosclerotic changes in 15-year-olds' artery walls. So if you're 33 and you're not doing some of the things I'm going to teach you today, or you're not aware of some of the implications of some of the triggers to damage the vessel wall, you need to be aware of it, because by the time you're 50, you might have some problems. For those of you that are in your 50s and 60s, you might be thinking, well, horse is out of the barn, or whatever the saying is. He's gone. right? What's the word? Whatever it is. The pig's out of the barn. I don't know. The pigs, where do you keep pigs? Something's out of the barn. Josiah wants to have nothing to do with that. Cat's out of the bag. Why would you put your cat in the bag? I don't know. I don't put my cats in the bag. But something's out of the barn. It's gone. It's too late. You're in your 50s and 60s. You think it's too late. It's not too late. Our bodies have an amazing reservoir and ability to repair and restore. Don't you doubt that for one moment. It is never too late. You could be in your 70s. This is not too late. Guarding your heart, protecting your heart. Let's go into the triggers. So you say, wait a minute, I thought you were talking about the physical heart. Yes. What happens is, as blood flow is coming to the heart, you're carrying nutrients to the heart. Well, here's the problem. If I impair blood flow to the heart muscle becomes ischemic. It lacks oxygen. Any damage that can ensue from there can in many cases be permanent. So I've got to have blood flow. So I'm going to focus not on like heart failure today or angina, whatever. So when I say guarding your heart, it's going to sound a bit like a misnomer. It's not. I want to make sure that the process of atherosclerosis is not happening to you in your circulatory system, because if it is, it will damage your heart. So let's talk about it. What are the triggers? What are the big problems here? What's the process of atherosclerosis? Atherosclerosis means nothing more than thickening of the artery wall, plaque building up. So I don't want to get into like a huge dissertation on physiology, because I'm going to bore you and you're going to go watch cartoons or something. I don't want you to do that. All right, so we want to make sure that we keep your attention. But I have to give you a little bit of background. If I don't give you some background, if you don't understand the basics of this, you're not going to understand when I get into some of the answers, some of the things, the tips that you can employ from a dietary standpoint. And then when we talk about supplementation, you're not going to understand what we're after and why I'm having you do this and why I'd recommend you to do this. So number one, process of atherosclerosis, what's really happening? There's damage to what's called the gag layer. So I just very inarticulately, whatever, if that's such a word, drew your what looks like your blood vessel wall, the lining of your blood vessel wall. So this would be where your blood flows. This would be the other side of it. And I did this purposely this way so that I can differentiate. So this is where your blood is flowing through here. Okay? All right? This initial layer, okay, there's three layers. There's the intima. It's the intimate area. It is right on where the blood flows. Everything that's going through your circulatory system is touching this intima. Then you have what is called the media. You have the internal layer that is more collagen matrix, structural strength. It's more a muscle layer, if you will. And then you have what's called back here the adventitia. I'm shocked that I would know that word. Adventitia. And all that really is kind of like, I guess, kind of a collagen saran wrap type of a layer that wraps around. It keeps everything in place. So you got three layers. You got the intima, you've got the media, the middle portion, obviously, where the more the musculature is, and then you've got this adventitia. What's the area that is really affected? This area right here, the intima. What's it made up of? It has predominantly, we call glycosaminoglycans. You have collagen. What's that? Well, glycosaminoglycans are actually made up of things from like glucosamine, hyaluronic acid. This is very important because when the damage occurs here, and I ran out of space, but when the damage occurs here, I'll teach you in a moment, that's where we begin to form the process of atherosclerosis. You say, well, geez, I haven't heard you mention cholesterol yet. Well, because cholesterol is a part of this, but I don't believe cholesterol is really the key player. I believe cholesterol is a bystander, happens to get involved in atherogenesis, but you will see that there are many other complicating factors or triggers that certainly are involved here. So number one, insulin resistance. What does insulin resistance mean? It means that I eat too much sugars, too much white, too much refined. I start to gain some weight, and I have a lot of high blood glucose. My pancreas produces a lot of insulin, and insulin starts rising and rising and rising. The process of insulin resistance because of notably a poor diet, begins to trigger, I don't know where I'll write this, but damage. We're going to remember where we're after, the intima, the lining of your artery wall. So insulin resistance begins to damage the lining of the intima, the lining of the innermost portion, the intimate portion of the blood vessel wall. Number 2, low nitric oxide production. Inactivity, low exercise, low antioxidants. I don't produce enough nitrogen oxide, or nitrous oxide rather. What happens? Nitric oxide helps the artery wall to vasodilate and to open up. That's important. We'll come back to that. Impaired repair. We have blockade of repair mechanisms. Our body has been given the ability that even when this intima has been damaged, that it is to repair itself. Well, because of poor nutrient status, too much stress, chemical exposures, low nitric oxide, that process is impaired. When that is impaired, now this intima lining becomes damaged. Ooh, now I got problems. And I'll show you that in a moment. Heavy metals. Doc Houston at Vanderbilt has done some nice work, has written a number of articles, which I'm in total agreement with, looking at heavy metals, and in particular mercury, that how mercury and metals in general create so much oxidative damage to our bodies that it can damage what again? The intima lining. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 mechanisms. 1, insulin resistance, pumping out too much insulin. It works against you, damages the wall. Low nitric oxide, I don't repair well. Heavy metals and chemicals, big time damage to the intima lining. Here's the other areas. High homocysteine. Homocysteine is a byproduct of cystine and cysteine metabolism. We need it. It's an amino acid. We need this to happen. If those processes aren't taking place, we don't methylate well, we have a huge problem. Now here's the key. Unfortunately, a lot of times this number is really high because we have inborn errors of metabolism, methyl tetrahydrofolate. That's actually not necessarily a genetic defect, but an impaired metabolic pathway. That homocysteine, we don't methylate well. I'm going to get into that. That's CH3 groups and that's biochemistry. But what happens is homocysteine rises. Homocysteine damages the lining of the intima. You say, man, alive, I'm lost already. I don't know what to do. What do I do about metals? What do I do about nitric oxide? Insulin resistance, homocysteine. I don't know what that is. I thought I ate that for dinner last night. Just hold on. I'm going to present to you the triggers, as I always do, and then we're going to go through and talk a little bit about things that are, what I would call secondary triggers, but really cause all these processes to take place. And then I'm going to give you what your options are, what your solutions are, then kind of break it down, Roman numeral 1 and 2, solutions from a food and dietary standpoint, teach you what the role of cholesterol is, how big of a role does it play, and then what nutrients. So this is going to be a 2-part. We'll have a part 1, a part 2, guarding your heart. That was a cue for Josiah, so he knew that we're going to do a part 2. Homocysteine. Homocysteine, if it's elevated, we've got to get this down. Have you ever had a homocysteine level done? Well, my doctor never recommended it. Well, I really don't care that your doctor ever recommended it. Well, I did ask him about it, or her about it, and she said, or he said, that there's no conclusive evidence. Ouch. They said that about vitamin D years ago. They said that about C-reactive protein years ago. Take it to the bank. You need to have a homocysteine level done. C-reactive protein. This is something that happens in our bodies. We all produce it. C-reactive protein. It's a protein produced by the liver in response to body-wide inflammation. If I am inflamed, you talking about arthritis, Joe? Not necessarily. You talking about rheumatoid arthritis? Well, that raises C-reactive protein. What are you talking about? Well, a diet that is pro-inflammatory, a lifestyle that's pro-inflammatory. I work around chemicals. I eat ho-hos for breakfast. I drink a soda or Coke. I drink a ton of coffee. I really don't like vegetables and fruits, and I'm a meat and potatoes guy. I love French fries. I love pizza. I really don't eat very much in the way of live foods. Well, see, that's a very pro-inflammatory diet. You're going to gain weight. C-reactive protein goes up, and guess what? I think you already figured this out. What's it do? Damages the intima, that intimate lining on the lining of our vascular. So notice I still haven't said a whole lot about cholesterol. You say, well, wait a minute, man. I've had it. I've had 2 bypasses, or I've had stents put in, and my doc says I got to be on these statins. Well, I'm not going to argue the point that we have to moderate cholesterol, but do you know that 50% of folks that have heart attacks, stents, bypasses, MIs, myocardial infarcts, do not have elevated total cholesterol? Met with a woman, we had a consult with a gal a couple weeks ago. She had a heart attack. Her total cholesterol, I believe, was about 160 when she had the heart attack. And they still put her on a statin. Why are we not looking at these other areas? Insulin resistance, low nitric oxide, an inability to repair. Maybe she's got a heavy metal burden. She never had a homocysteine level done. She had never had a C-reactive protein. Guess what they checked only? Her cholesterol. And said, well, it was 160, but you had a heart attack, so it must still be the bad guy. Now again, I'm balanced in this approach, but you'll see as we go along. All right, C-reactive protein. Are there other things that can damage? Absolutely. There are a lot of other things, but for sake of just keeping this pretty clean and pretty tight today, the triggers are focused, and I'm going to stick to this area. Elevated lipoprotein A, Lp(a), big issue. Low antioxidant status. I don't consume enough antioxidants. So here's the real key. When 1, 2, or 3, or 4 of these things are in action, I begin to damage the lining of that intima, okay? Now what happens is cholesterol, lipoprotein A, monocytes, leukocytes, part of our immune system, they come rushing in here to try to create patchwork. But unfortunately, what starts to happen is now I get foam cells, I have atheromas form, so I start to get bumps, if you will, on the lining of the vasculature. You sound, well, boy, that's really a simplified. Instead of a nice, smooth intima, I get these bumps that are now forming. And then I get bumps on top of bumps. And now I have thickening atheromas, atherosclerosis that forms. So it's not a real good pictorial, but I think you get the picture. Now, and here, I can't even read my own writing. Then lipoproteins and cholesterol, okay, the monocytes, the phagocytes, see, they begin to rush. You say, wait a minute, that sounds like it's trying to repair. It is, but it's impaired repair because it is rushing a lot of activity. There's phagocytosis that takes place. There's monocytes that accumulate. Now the cholesterol and lipoproteins come in, and literally the body is trying to act like patchwork. It forms an atheroma. Foam cells are then formed. Now we have the process of a plaque forming. But wait a minute, but you did say cholesterol is involved. I did say that as part of the repair process, but not, I do not believe, as the igniter or the ignition switch necessarily that creates. In some cases, yes, some folks have familial high cholesterol. They're born with an inability to literally have a switch. LDL cholesterol, for example, is not turned off when the body's produced a certain amount. Your body has a feedback mechanism. Your liver makes it. And so cholesterol and fats and so on are being carried by LDLs to tissues. HDLs are bringing them back to the liver to be processed and eliminated. When LDLs significantly outproportionally number HDLs, you have more going out and you have more tissue damage. Oh, so you are talking about cholesterol. Well, to a degree, because there are some of you that have significantly high cholesterol. You're at a high risk. I'll teach you about oxidized cholesterol. But I don't believe that's the initiator for the majority of folks. First of all, 1 in 3 Americans have heart disease and so on. It's attributable for literally about 1 in 3 deaths in America right now at some point because of heart disease. So it's a huge issue. Guard your heart. So you're learning a little bit about the overview. Now what about the real like black and white triggers? Let's talk about them. Smoking. If you're a smoker, that obviously is a big issue. It literally impairs the body's ability to break down in the process and get rid of LDLs. It makes LDLs oxidize. That means they become rancid or rusty. Now they go and stick into these damaged areas and they create those atheromas. High lipids. Some people really do have really high cholesterol. That is a problem. Many of you have high blood pressure. Here's another concrete trigger or aggravator to the process of atherosclerosis. Some of you have diabetes or you're on your way to diabetes. You are either pre-diabetic or you're already a diabetic. What happens is proteins are kind of connecting with protein, drawing a blank here. Proteins are connecting with the sugar or excess glucose or sugar in your system, and it forms called a glycation process that literally starts to harden artery walls. So if you're a diabetic, you're at a higher risk, probably a threefold higher risk for atherosclerosis. Inactivity, if you don't exercise, you're not helping nitric oxide to be produced on the lining of your vessels. You are not causing the cardiovascular wall to literally work, expand and contract. You're at a much higher risk for atherosclerosis. So insulin resistance, which is a highly white refined processed diet, not enough antioxidants. I'm pumping out a ton of insulin to guard against all this sugar that I'm consuming. That's a trigger. Low antioxidant status. Too many of us do not have enough of the right vitamin E, ascorbates, vitamin C, omegas. We don't have enough antioxidants in our system to do what? To help the repair process. Man, it sounds like I can't do any of this. Yes, you can. It's pretty simple. But you need to understand what the triggers are. Low essential fatty acid status. Many of you do not have enough omegas. You do not have enough good fats. You don't have enough olive oil in your diet. High fibrinogen. Many of you don't even know what fibrinogen is. You've never even had it checked. It should have been up here. Pardon me. High fibrinogen is a trigger for stroke. 40% increased incidence of stroke. Cardiovascular issues. Low magnesium, low potassium status. Low vitamin K status. Stress. High cortisol absolutely damages the vessel wall. So if you're under a lot of stress, it's damaging. If you have low mineral status, it's damaging. I have low essential fatty acids and omegas and olive oil type fats in my body and nuts and seed. That's a trigger. That's a problem. I don't have enough antioxidants because I don't eat enough foods that are rich in antioxidants. And I don't take the correct supplements. Oh, I take vitamin E. But then I heard it was bad for my heart. Well, all the studies that were done on vitamin E that showed they were, quote, bad for your heart were the synthetic forms. They were D-L-alpha-tocopherol acetates. They were the synthetic forms of vitamin E. You should never use a synthetic. A couple of exceptions. Certain forms of prostate cancer, certain forms of cancer. There are certain types of vitamin E succinates that I recommend for people. But as a general health, you should never use a synthetic form of vitamin E. It might cause some problems. All right, so what are antioxidants? C, E, selenomethionine. I mean, these are new, vitamin A, they're antioxidants. They protect against oxidative stress. So let's just think about this. I'm working out in the yard, I'm spraying chemicals, I'm around mulch and I'm around chemicals and I got it all over me. I'm painting the fence and I'm using turpentine and I'm using gasoline to clean up and I'm weed whacking and I'm using the lawnmower and I got grease all over me. See, we're exposed to chemicals. I'm cleaning the bathroom. I'm breathing in some of this air with the carpeting and what's in our ceilings. See, we're exposed to chemicals. So your body needs antioxidants to literally protect you, almost like a coating of paint or protection goes on metal to protect it from rusting because of salt and water. We need antioxidants to protect against chemicals that cause an oxidative stress or oxidative damage in our bodies. So hopefully, we're going to go to a break, and you can see that there's ways that you can guard your heart. There are triggers. There's overriding issues. Cholesterol goes down on the chart. It really does, because for most Americans, a lot of this, we are not doing well. We are insulin resistant. We're inactive. We don't have adequate antioxidants in our diet. We don't eat well. So some of you might be listening and saying hey, but, I know this one guy, he ran every day. He ran 5 days a week. He really ate good, and he keeled over of a heart attack at 49 or 50. I know that. Those are not the rule. Those are the exceptions. And that can happen. But in those cases, I wonder if these individuals ever had a lipoprotein little a done or a fibrinogen level done, because he may have had these characteristic markers or homocysteine. They may have been high. His cholesterol may have been perfect, but he's never had them checked. He's never had a vitamin D level done. He's never had some of these other characteristic markers that should be indicated for. And he could have had an MI and keeled over at 49, even though he was an endurance athlete. That is the exception. It's not the rule. Trust me when I tell you, the rule is, for many Americans, we are fitting into 2, 3, and 4 of these categories, and we're wondering why we have stents put in at 53 years of age. And it looks like it's moving farther and farther down because of a lot of things: chemicals, low antioxidant, and all the issues that I'm talking about here today. It seems like a lot. It's really not. It really isn't. I have a lot on this board here today. We're going to go to a break. Before we go to a break, Ron sent an email. By the way, you can send an email question, by the way, at support@askjoedimatteo.com. I recently read that thyroid might be linked to diabetes. Do you feel that thyroid, diabetes, and heart disease are all linked? In some way, things can be linked. I don't know that I would directly connect them. I can connect them. For example, I believe that diabetes or autoimmune, where we have an autoimmune component going on that has induced the diabetes, can a lot of times be a gluten intolerance or a gluten sensitivity, have an autoimmune issue. So can thyroid. Thyroid issues, folks that are gluten intolerant have a much higher risk of autoimmune thyroid disease. Then the question is, do you believe that all 3 of them are linked? In some way, vague manner, but it's not like how adrenals affect your thyroid and how low adrenal function can downregulate, or female hormones or male hormones that are diminished are affected by the adrenals. That's a much more intimate. I don't believe that is necessarily, indirectly, but not, I don't believe, at their core. Hey, if you have some questions, you want to reach us off air, 888-865-9595, 888-865-9595, and ask for Terry, Amy, Dee, one of our staff members. You want to set up a time to do a consult to get very specific with your situation. How do we order the labs? What do we do? Boom, we can do that. If you have questions, you want to send them for us here now, and when we can answer them, we answer a lot of these questions even live on the air. We can do that as well. Stay tuned. We're going to come back with part 2 of this, part 1 of this teaching on guarding your heart. We're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts from a dietary standpoint, and then eventually we'll cover how nutrients play a huge role. Stay tuned. Just enjoy this for a few moments. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that Matt Redman worship song. Thanks for being with us. We're going to get into the next part of how do we manage some of the areas that are triggers for atherosclerosis, whatever we want to call it, cardiovascular disease, and how I just started the teaching today. How do we guard our heart? And there's a guarding our heart from the seat of our emotion standpoint that is a biblical perspective that we're taught, that we're encouraged from a biblical standpoint, because the Bible says that out of it flow all the issues of life. So if we're bearing grudges, resentment, hatred, jealousy, animosity, unforgiveness, all these things that we hold on to, fears and anxieties and misconceptions and misreading people, we hold on to all of this. It affects our inner man. And then the Bible says then that that eventually flows out and spews out into the rest of your life. Out of it flow the issues of life. Out of what? Out of our inner man, the seat of our emotions. Physically, we know that the heart is critical. If your heart is not functioning well, you can't walk across the room. You can't go up the steps. You can't walk your dog. It's critical. Now, I don't want to get into what we're talking about, cardiomyopathy, low ejection fractions. There's a lot of specific areas that you can go into. I just want to help you understand how we can protect the tributaries that flow to our heart. So today we have some more questions. A 52 black female weighs 180 pounds. What to take? I have I've had a supracervical in 205. I'm not real sure what that means. I would like to stop taking meds. I've been taking since 2000. I take supplement with enzymes, vitamin C, no more vitamin D. My levels are 141. Yeah, you're over the top. I support garlic. I exercise a couple times a week, kickboxing. I want to sleep better. Well, if we're not sleeping, we will have problems with weight gain. And if she's 180 pounds, we got to get her weight down. A1C, or average blood sugar, of 6 What can I improve on? Green smoothies for breakfast, salads for lunch. I've been having hot flashes for about 3 months. Well, we've got to get her sleeping. It sounds like her female hormones are problematic, so that certainly is playing a role. If that's what she's consuming, I'm not real sure what's going on, how she even has an A1C of 6. It should be under if that's truly what she's consuming, and why she can't lose weight. Her leptin levels may be elevated. Her C-reactive protein may be elevated. Her fasting insulin needs to be done. So I believe there's 3 areas that we still should catch with her or attempt to define. But she's working out. She's why don't we at least get you on some essential sleep to try to get you sleeping better? And so there's a lot there, because I'm not real sure what that cervical issue was. But we appreciate your email. If there's something else that we can maybe help you to give you more specific, certainly you can call that off-air number or email us and have someone get back to you. Let's get back to managing this process of atherosclerosis. So we did talk about lipids or cholesterol. LDLs and HDLs, they do play a role, because if they are really high and these are really low, that is problematic, okay? Number 2, when these oxidize, what's that mean? Fancy word, when they go rancid. When LDL cholesterol oxidizes or becomes rancid because of a lack of antioxidants, etc., those are much more atherogenic. They will encourage plaque formation. Blood sugars. If your blood sugars are elevated, they must be managed. You say, well, I'm not a diabetic, but doc says I'm a pre-diabetic. We've got to do whatever it takes. More exercise, eliminating certain types of carbohydrates, more beans and legumes, more soluble fiber in your diet, less white and refined. Why? Because blood sugars, if you don't manage them, will trigger plaque formation. If you don't have adequate antioxidants, next teaching in part 2, we will talk about what specific supplementation you should be using as a preventative, and even if you've already been documented how they both work. And we'll talk about the role of buffered C ascorbates. We'll talk about the role of polyresveratrols that contain transresveratrol. We'll talk about the omegas, the right forms, and how they can literally keep the intima lining smooth so that plaque is less vulnerable to break off and move and create a problem for you down the line. What about the right forms of E? How are they cardioprotective? You know, we have documentation of working with people that have started with their carotid arteries as high as 70% blocked, and are now more recently, after 2 to 3 years of supplementation, back down into the 40% blockage range with complete smooth texture on the lining of their intima lining of their carotid. We have that documented. Diet, supplementation. 70% blockage, a couple years later, down to 40. I have a couple of folks, actually. So, but what about this? Well, I take vitamin C, I take ascorbic acid, bargain basement brand. I get vitamin D over the counter, $4.99, and I get, this mega jug of omegas. Sorry, don't talk to me about those. I took vitamin D, I took C, I took omegas, and I had a heart attack. What type, what form, and were you managing these other layers? If you're not using good forms, I'm sorry. I don't want to be coarse, or don't bring it to me. I don't want to talk about it, because those are not the right forms. And if you've been using 1,500 milligrams of bad forms of calcium for eons, like your doc was telling you 15 years ago, and you're still using it today, and they're unabsorbable forms, and now they've told you, oh, stop using them, because now we're seeing women that creates heart disease. Whoa. That is an amazing insight. I mean, indirectly, I talked about that 14, 15 years ago. Why? Because those are unionized forms of calcium. Your body doesn't know how to use them well. It's going to kind of find places to adhere to. They're not absorbable forms of calcium. You don't need that much calcium in a supplement form. So, I mean, this can get really deep, but antioxidants, we got to get you on the right antioxidants, and I'll give you the food portion of this. If you're lipoprotein A, if it's never been done, you need to have a lipoprotein A done. Just thought of another thing that I didn't even put on my sheet this morning. If your lipoprotein A is elevated, your homocysteine is elevated, and your C-reactive protein, they must be managed, or you are a sitting duck, regardless of what your cholesterol levels are. If these are high, you've got trouble. If your triglycerides are high, regardless of what your total cholesterol is, you've got huge problems. now being recognized more and more possibly as not maybe an independent, but a close to independent risk factor for heart disease, atherosclerosis. If you've got high blood pressure and if you are physically inactive, you are sedentary, we have got to get you doing something, and your blood pressure must be managed. If you're overweight, I don't even know where to start. If you're overweight, that is a huge risk factor. You know why? Because this produces a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. Obesity. Yeah, see, your fat cells produce inflammatory proteins that'll damage your joints, your brain, and your circulatory system, your cardiovascular health. If your fibrinogen levels, and do you realize that uric acid, you could have normal cholesterol, normal blood sugars, which I doubt that you would have if you have elevated uric acid, but you could have most of these other aspects be normal. If you just have this one elevated, you still have a 40% increased risk for heart disease, lipoprotein A, and you've probably never had it checked. If you have elevated uric acid, do you know that that produces a tremendous amount of inflammation? You say, what's that? My husband had elevated uric acid years ago, and he had gout. Isn't that gout? Yeah, it leads to gout, but I'm not talking about gout. I mean, it can form crystals in your joints. Hugely painful, horrible, gouty arthritis. But what the underlying theme, when uric acid is elevated, it is producing inflammation on your blood vessel walls. That is a huge trigger for what? Remember we talked about that intima lining, right? The lining where all the blood flows through. And then the intima lining can become damaged or traumatized. And then all of us, from what? Inflammation, uric acid, yes. And then remember, then come the monocytes and lipoprotein A and cholesterol. And they try to start repairing this, and I start to form literally little bumps, atheromas, and over time, the more inflammation. But Joe, you said cholesterol, yes. But I'm telling you, trauma to the wall, inability to repair, some of these other numbers being off of the charts, that's what's at the problem. Cholesterol just happens to be a bystander as it's coming through, and when it oxidizes and goes bad, certainly we need to manage it, but you got to learn these other factors. You got anybody who has heart disease in your family. So we blew through those pretty quickly because we're gonna wrap this in a minute. Now let's just get to the food portion very quickly, and then I'm going to cover it probably in a little more detail next week. But the food portion, I'll write it up. I'll have it up next time. But plant foods, more beans, more legumes have to become a part of your diet. Well, I don't like beans. Well, learn to like them. Make some lentil soup. Soluble fibers, lowers your blood sugar, protects the cardiovascular wall, good for you. Fiber is your friend if you have a tendency for heart disease or you have had stents or plaques that have formed and you've had to have stents and bypasses. We've got to have the correct types of fats. We do not eat the right forms of olive oil. We're consuming all other types of oils today. Olive oil is still your best bet when it comes to heart disease. Take that to the bank. Antioxidant rich, polyphenols, etc. They are protective to the vessel walls. Number 3, more vegetables. We don't eat enough vegetables. Organic, if available, locally grown, secondary. Grow some of your own. Next, we need to eat more fish. Oh, I heard fish is high in mercury. It is, but if you have adequate buffered ascorbates in your body and adequate selenomethionine that you get out of our daily essentials, it's a non-issue, okay? I mean, I don't want to get into that whole technical aspect of that, but you could have the right nutrients on board to raise up a standard to protect you from offending agents like metals, mercury, and so on. Omegas. If you're not taking quality omegas and eating enough fish, it's a huge problem. That we'll cover in part 2. Nuts, almonds, walnuts, flaxseed. Nuts are your friend. They're rich in folate. They're rich in the right types of fats. They are rich in arginine. Arginine helps to raise, now watch this, and my thing is not writing. Arginine helps to raise, remember I had nitric oxide on there before? See, people think you can take nitric. You can't take nitric oxide, contrary to what your 16-year-old's telling you that he bought a supplement that has it doesn't. You don't. Sorry. You have to have amino acids, citrulline, lysine, arginine, C, that help you make nitric oxide. When you make nitric oxide, you cause the vessel walls to dilate or to open up. NO is formed on the vessel walls. They open up and they dilate. So nuts help you to do that. Plus, they have the right forms of folic acid. Folic acid, the right forms, now we would tell you to do a methyl tetrahydrofolate, MTHF form of that, helps to open up your artery walls. So this is not some magic. This is not some, just, by my concoction. No, I'm giving you the straight scoop. If you have a family history of heart disease, atherosclerosis, mother, dad, siblings, or you have had something in the past, you need to be bearing down on some of these issues. I already mentioned fiber. I rewrote soluble fiber. Soluble fiber is important. Oatmeal. If you don't eat steel-cut oats and you have heart disease or a family history, you need to be eating steel-cut oats. You put some fresh berries on there, or frozen berries, organic preferably, and then you put some cut-up walnuts and almonds on there as well. Green vegetables. We need to eat green vegetables. Vitamin K. You know how important vitamin D and vitamin K are to your circulatory system, to your blood vessels? It's huge. Why I get so distraught when I have to work with someone that's on Coumadin, that they're on vitamin K restricted diets. Because in my heart of hearts, I know what's going to happen. Animal studies document that low vitamin K actually causes stiffening and thickening of the artery walls. Vitamin K. Where do I get now I'll go out and buy vitamin K. No. Make sure you're eating green leafies and spinaches and greens. I don't like those foods. Learn. Know what to tell you. I don't know what to say there. Take quality supplements and our daily essentials. We have vitamin K, but it's got to come through your diet as well. We talked about seafood. Figs. Figs can be a great nutrient. They're rich in minerals, potassium, magnesium, high in soluble fiber. You say, it has a lot of sugar, but don't eat, 2 pieces of cake and then eat figs. Figs should be eaten with your foods and your meals and maybe as a dessert or as a treat. Great for your circulatory system, your cardiovascular system. I talked about lentils. I've talked about legumes. I didn't even talk about green tea. Green tree. Yeah, green tree. That's where we can go today. No, green tea. If you're from Pittsburgh, green tree is in, I said that yesterday too. Green tea is a beverage that you consume that has ECGCs, epicogalactans, catechins that are very protective, rich antioxidants that are protective to your circulatory system. Okay, so we have covered these areas. We're going to wrap today, but I'm going to tell you next teaching, phase 2, part 2, on guarding your heart, okay? How do we protect and how do we get markers to write for us? How do we protect your heart? We've got the tributaries that are flowing to your heart, we've got to keep them open. So in next teaching, we're going to talk about the role of polyresveratrols, a combination of compounds that absolutely, these are going to be kind of what I want to say, our answers or your tips of what you can do. How buffered C ascorbates, I'm going to teach you specifics about how it affects cardiovascular health. How the right forms of vitamin E that contain tocopherols and tocotrienols, as in our perfect E, plays a huge role. I will teach you how omegas, contrary to what you see in the media, are documented to protect cardiovascular health, stabilize plaque formation, reduce inflammation. What's the role of vitamin D in cardiovascular health? What's the role of vitamin K? Okay? So just as at a glance, these are some of the things that we be talking about. So if I have someone with cardiovascular disease, I'm going to talk to them about the dietary aspects that we've just covered. I'm certainly going to talk to them about if they're overweight, what we need to do, if they have poor sleep, if they're type A personalities. We're going to get some labs, a C-reactive protein, a lipoprotein A, a fibrinogen level, a homocysteine level, and we'll let your medical doctor look at your cholesterol. Not that we won't talk to you about that, but there's a difference, the depth that we're taking here. So these are just a few of the things that we will talk about. Polyresveratrol, buffered C, the tocopherol tocotrienols, the omega-3s, vitamin D, vitamin K, and there's more. But that's just a smattering. That is an overview of what we'll cover in part 2. We'll get more specific about the diet and how these nutrients plus, and there's a little bit more, that actually you can get in combination with other things and supplementation. Now, I could talk to you about how to raise nitric oxide. I could put you on some arginine preps. Certainly would be helpful. If you've already had a heart attack, I would recommend a specific form of amino acids, raw amino acids that you would take once a day on an empty stomach. I might even talk to you, if you've already had heart attacks, about the role of CoQ, which we will talk about here, CoQ10, and even with some preps that are used that actually can raise energy production within the heart. So there's a lot of things. We can talk about everything from carnitine. I don't want to make this real complicated. This is about protecting the vessel walls, the right forms of folic acid, MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate, a specific form. Joe, I heard you talk about that on the air. Aren't you supposed to do a lab? Well, you can. Well, I would recommend that we do a genotype for MTHFR, but why not just take 1 to 5 milligrams a day, 1 capsule a day, and just be on guard, right? Good things. We have a lot more to cover. I'll get specific about nutrients. I'm going to get specific on, I think next teaching, part 2, we will cover how specific nutrients like CoQ, how buffered ascorbates are protected, are documented, how the right forms of E are documented to protect your circulatory system, how the right forms of omegas, but remember that has to be combined with you taking some steps to help yourself with what you eat, what you consume, some weight loss, and we might want to get fasting insulins. There's a lot more to cover. Thanks for being with us on part 1 of Guarding Your Heart. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to part 2, and I hope you join us for part 2. Tell some of your friends and neighbors. Have a blessed day.